your left-hand side is a bullet background paper that I put together. Just basically, it consolidates all the notes from some of these sessions that we put together. On the right-hand side, this is a skeleton sketch of what the Blackboard distant learning part of the course would look like. We have right now the rights to this sandbox, is what they call it. Basically, it's just a place where you can go and change things around. You can't break it, okay? It's just somebody's authorization in Blackboard that they've allowed us to use. I think it's Air University that's letting us use this right now. So you can't mess it up. You can go out there and play around with it as a development person would, okay? But you can upload material or change things around. The first thing that we did, let me show this to our folks here. We kind of divided up our BFMOC course into these 7 types of lessons. So the 7 types of lessons are case studies, discussion topics, group projects, guest speakers, individual projects, lectures, and then processes. So under each one of these folders, what I was doing is looking at something that we teach in our current BFMOC course. So for case studies, we do vignettes. But just like Mr. McGinley sent us the email last week asking if we still use the Stanford vignette, I think Mr. Campbell's the only one that still uses those. We're going to replace those vignettes with the DFML 21 videos that we have out there for leadership, or something similar. Just, somebody's got a hot mic, but welcome.
That would be me.
Oh, is that Ms. Hernandez by chance?
No, this is Dr. Johnson.
Oh.
I can get through you on DCO, but you've got to open the mic. My mic is closed down. You got to give me access.
So you would like speaking rights on DCO, ma'am?
That's up to you. If you want me to keep on listening I can do that.
Okay. Yeah, my microphone is actually picking up whatever you say over the phone. So we will pick up what you say over the DSN line.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Discussion topics. You know that we have a lot of injects throughout the course that we just discuss with the students, and we kind of have a conversation live. We went and separated that out as a completely different kind of lesson from that of the case studies or any of the other parts of the project and curriculum. Group projects. I stole one from initial distribution block. So Mr. Ramirez, you'll be familiar with the initial distro presentation that students have to present together as a group. We consider that a completely different kind of lesson than any of the other 7. Guest speakers. I took one example that we had just recently from the Deems training that we got from Major Wagner from Scott Air Force Base. Oftentimes we're going to have folks dialing in either through FMSOC curriculum or BFMOC curriculum, guest speaking on processes, systems, whatever's new in the career field. Individual projects. This one I stole from Block 6, Mr. Ramirez. So I'm sure there are different kinds of individual projects that we do throughout the course where we evaluate one student's project at a time. This one specifically was how students do a status of funds. And then the last 2 lessons, the ones that we use the most often in the course, one is lecture. So I stole one from Block 2, Stages of Accounting, where it's straight out of the text. The slides match the lesson plan, the lesson plan matches the study guide. And then we have some sort of evaluation. And the last lesson is a process. So Ms. King, I stole the EA project out of block, was this block 3 or block 4?
Oh, that's a block 4.
Block 4. So for those of you who haven't taught this subjective in the past, it's a very regimented process that we go through in order to get the students to understand the process of building an economic analysis so that they can end up with, as Ms. King has prepared here, the correct numbers. So they've got to go through the right sort of calculations in order to reach the same exact answer. So I consider that a process. So those are the 7 different types of lessons that we do in BFMOC. The way I look at it is everything that we do in BFMOC can be categorized as one of those 7 types of lessons. So for the past several weeks, what I've been doing with experts from Air University, AETC, A3, and other locations is we've been looking at the blended learning tool, such as Blackboard, and we've been asking ourselves, how would we do those 7 types of lessons in this format? So in your calendar invitation, you guys have a copy of this bullet background. And if you're wondering if this is something that's codified in a reg or something, it's not. Okay, this is just a accumulation of our notes. And these notes are basically an outline of what we consider best practices. Now, I want you to know as instructors and as Mr. McGinley as the development, that I am an advocate for instructors having the flexibility to choose between several different alternatives so that you can figure out the best way for your students and for the material that you're presenting. Okay, so we'll start with my first one. In the bullet background, it talks about case studies, vignettes, guest speakers, and lectures. There's several different ways that we can present that information in this blended environment. So on your screen, you'll see one of the options that we have is we can put pre-recorded videos in Blackboard, and it will actually archive that file in the lesson. So students will be able to play the recording as if it were a YouTube video, okay? And they can play it from the Blackboard material itself. So we don't necessarily have to have a database somewhere. We don't necessarily have to keep our own little YouTube channel. We don't have to use any other system. We could just use the Blackboard platform for pre-recorded videos. So Blackboard is one of the alternatives. The challenge with Blackboard is, as you see right now, as I'm trying to play it, the system is going to be limited on buffering, their connection speed, and Blackboard does have a limit for how much memory it allows per course. So if we have very long videos or if we have lots of videos, that's going to impact the way the course flows. So it's something to take into consideration. Another way of utilizing Blackboard with pre-recorded videos for any of the case studies, vignettes, guest speakers, or lectures, instead of putting the file on the Blackboard, you can also just insert a hyperlink. So hyperlink doesn't take as much space on the Blackboard database, but it does depend on the student's access to whatever external site. So if the external video is on a YouTube, or if the external video is on a SharePoint, or if it's somewhere else, we have to make sure that students have access to wherever that else is. In this case, this hyperlink just takes them directly to a SharePoint site that's managed by SAF-FM. Okay, it's the same exact video that was here, but this is just a hyperlink. So basically Blackboard is just the host, and it just sends you to the true location of the information.
When you go to a SharePoint, you got to be on the .mil.
Exactly, and that's the challenge with, if you depend on an external database like SharePoint, then students have to have a .mil access and a CAC card enabled computer.
But if there was a chance, well, go ahead. I was going to think,
Yeah, go.
if you had a link to, other than SharePoint, for instance, like you're showing up there in one of your tabs, YouTube or all
Yes.
of them. What's the one on the Mill Suite?
Mill Suite has a Mill Tube,
Yeah.
yes, which Mill Tube is also going to depend on a CAC enabled computer.
Enabled, but not necessarily a .mil site.
Agreed. The other alternative, as you just mentioned, is YouTube itself. For a while now, I've been utilizing I've created a YouTube channel for BFMOC, and a lot of the guest speakers that we've been having in the course, I've recorded and I've uploaded their videos to this channel. So we already have a series of videos that are out there. Last week there were several training videos, for example, that we went through the boot camps for DCO and Mill Suite. I've got those recordings out there for you to watch at your leisure. So we can just as easily hyperlink something to YouTube, and the students can watch it off of there without needing a CAC card. The challenge is not every student's going to have a firewall that will allow YouTube videos to be played. So there's several different ways that you can approach the same problem for case studies, vignettes, guest speakers, and lectures. The point I want to make about showing this to you is that you don't have to stick with just one way of presenting the material. You're going to have several different options. Okay? Last but not least, just as I'm doing now, DCO allows for the playing videos. So right now, for example, if I opened up a pod we'll say, let's see. You can open up a pod like this and upload a file, like a video or a YouTube URL link, etc. And once you upload that to the file pod, then the students can download it from wherever they are. The challenge with utilizing the DCO is that students have to be in the classroom at the same time you're in the classroom. So it has to be, what do you call that, Mr. McGinley, synchronous?
Yes.
Synchronous classroom. So logistically, there are some challenges with that. But those are the different options that we laid out for you. So there's different ways of using Blackboard and DCO to achieve the same result for video clips, basically. Now, ideally, personally, I think the live interaction via DCO would be the best interaction with the students. The challenge with doing the live DCO with students that are in Ramstein and Guam and all across the continent is finding a time when an instructor is going to be in the same room as those students. When we talked to Mr. Hagan at Air University about that challenge, he said that quite literally their supervisory chain has worked out a way to have instructors' schedules adjusted for certain demographics of students. So, for example, they may have a class set up specifically for PACAF students. And so, since all the students would be available at a certain time frame, then the instructor's work schedule would be based on that student grouping time frame. So the instructor would be working, we'll say, 6 in the afternoon until midnight or so. And then do a live DCO session in the evening from home, even teleworking, instead of coming all the way here to the schoolhouse to initiate a classroom session. So on occasion, Mr. Hagan is actually dialed in from his own home to discuss these kinds of things with us. Now, evaluations is always a big question mark. When we discussed case studies, vignettes, guest speakers, lectures, etc., we all know, having been trained in AETC for some time, that evaluations have to be done on curriculum-related material. Especially guest speakers, we can't necessarily test the students on what the guest speakers said, especially if the guest speakers didn't have some sort of lesson planned or if they weren't qualified instructors. So you all know that we're limited to whatever the curriculum, the study guide says. So just as we have before, we can distribute to the students study guide material, and only test them on the study guide material, but we can utilize case studies, vignettes, guest speakers, etc., to enhance their learning and go beyond just what's written in the text. Okay. Let me go back to Blackboard real quick. Okay. Now, injects. Injects are a completely different kind of lesson that we do, where we have a lot more discussion and interaction between the students. So we're depending on them to be in the same place at the same time. DCO is most likely going to be the best solution for that problem. In DCO, as you see here, as a host, I have the ability to select what's called a breakout room. In doing a breakout room, I can select which students will go into which breakout room. The reason breakout rooms are very effective is because in each breakout room, you can set it up so that there will be, we'll say, one inject question set or one inject challenge for each group. And that group is only going to be able to see whatever's in their breakout area. So we'll say, Mr. Campbell, that you have an inject regarding what students would do in a certain leadership challenge. Well, you would have one set of questions in one breakout room, another set of questions in another breakout room, and you would pre-select the students in your DCO and just click and drag them into those breakout sessions. That way they would be in that breakout room and they would have to work on that discussion point in that room. That's how you would use DCO if it were live. The challenge, again, is scheduling everybody for that and then setting that up ahead of time in order for that kind of DCO interaction. Now, if we're going to use Blackboard, on the other hand, you don't necessarily depend on students being in the same location at the same time, but there is a little bit more lag between somebody's submission and response. So the discussion board is how currently they're using kind of student interaction and recording it. Discussion boards, basically what you would do is you would set up some sort of, in this case they said icebreaker. You can have all kinds of lessons and different topics, but basically the expectation would be for a student to go into the discussion board and type in some sort of response. You can assign other students to grade each other, to respond to other people's comments, similar to online classes that perhaps you've taken in the past. The challenge with that kind of interaction is that it's not as, the turnaround time's longer, and it's not as interactive as you will in a live session. The challenge with the live session is students aren't going to be able to communicate with each other via microphone and camera unless everybody's got one. So another alternative is utilizing, like we are right now, the conference call capability. In the end, injects are going to be a challenge to do in the distant learning environment. When it comes down to evaluations, currently right now, there's very little that we do in the curriculum to grade how students participate in the injects. Suggested ways of grading them in the distant learning is using the, as they see here, kind of a matrix of how many words the students submitted. If what they submitted has anything to do with the topic at hand, you can use the student feedback sort of as a grading tool as well. You can see from students' responses whether or not the originator of the comment was making any sense or not. Looking at processes. So in Ms. King's block 4, we had the economic analysis process where there's a very specific set of steps that students need to understand to be able to go through. There are several different ways that you can accomplish that kind of lesson in a distant learning environment. The first way is very similar to how we discussed guest speakers and lectures, etc. So before we showed you how to upload videos, the first way that they found most effective in a distant learning environment is to have small pre-recorded videos per step. So you'd have, for example, Ms. King, you'd have a small recording explaining the first page of the worksheet. And then the link below would be a specific tab in that worksheet. So students would have access to their own copy, and they would have to follow the steps in that first video. And then you can imagine a series of videos that would bring them to a final evaluation. So basically we would be grading them on whether or not they've got the correct answer at the conclusion of all of these steps. Now, that's how you would do it if you do pre-recorded videos with links. If you decide to use DCO in a live session, similar to the way we showed you before, you would share some sort of file and you would post it out there so that the students would be able to download it. You would walk them through a process. For right now, as an example, this big gray box that you see on our screen is actually showing everybody in DCO whatever is going on this browser. So everybody in DCO is actually following my mouse, watching whatever we're doing online. If this were an Excel spreadsheet, same thing. They would be seeing whatever we're doing on the Excel spreadsheet. So the advantage of having the DCO live is you would be able to walk someone through the steps and you can respond to their questions in their comment box as you're going through that process. For those of you that participated last week in the DCO and Mill Suite training, it was very similar to that. So you could, especially with dual screens, you could bring up one browser or one file and follow along the video or follow along whoever's presenting live and then make comments or questions as it's going.
You can run your DCO room on one and what everyone views is on the other screen.
Exactly. So you can split the two screens that way. Now, a third alternative that we have here at Keesler Air Force Base, thanks to Mr. I think Curley, is that his name? Carly? Carly. Mr. Carly.
The one that you can go to over there and deal with stuff.
Yes. They have a program called Adobe Captivate. So if you have something that is we'll say, Mr. Ramirez, you want to teach students how to build a query in Chris. Adobe Captivate will record you going through the steps in building that query. So it doesn't require us creating a test database, and it doesn't require us creating a quasi-CRIS system, but it just takes pictures of you going through CRIS and building a query system. But the advantage of Adobe Captivate is their designers have the ability to go back over that recording and then open up little text boxes or open up little drop-down menus. So in Adobe Captivate, you can have students go back through the exact same process and select the correct answer. It's kind of like a live quiz. A similar type process has been done for, I think it's called DEAMS training. So there's a few trainings out there on our Financial Management Distant Learning Center that allows us to go through those kinds of systems. Now, the challenge with evaluating how students are accomplishing a process is similar to that of the discussion board. You can either have multiple choice questions that are out there embedded in the lesson plan, or you can have a completely separate test or progress check or appraisal, if you will, that is dependent on their results from that process. So in Ms. King's example, she has an answer sheet. All the students, regardless of the scenario they're given, they've got predetermined answers that they have to have before they're done with the analytical part. So in our test course report, for example, we would have the predetermined answers out there, and the students would have to select from a variety of answers and choose the correct one. And this Blackboard will actually grade it for you and everything. So it kind of eases that process as far as ensuring that students are capturing the intent. The challenge with having the test material out there, and this is the same as with any online learning system, is students most likely are going to start to Google things or post things out there on Wiki Answers. So really depends on how often we want to update the process or the options that are out there, but after a certain amount of time, students are most likely going to begin bypassing the evaluation process and just going straight to the answers, okay, rather than going through the steps. So you got to analyze which processes are the most important for them to understand prior to them coming here in person. Now, the last two are very similar, the individual and group projects. So both projects are going to have a common set of information at the very beginning. We'll say individual projects like Mr. Campbell in the deployment scenarios, you may have, we'll say, your fiscal loss scenarios, where individually they're supposed to come up with their answer, whether something is or is not, they can purchase it with certain kinds of money. Well, in the Blackboard group discussions, you can have them post those kinds of answers. If it's something that requires typing it out, if there's something that we could put a multiple choice out there, then there's other ways that we can evaluate them in the Blackboard environment. But for group projects, having collaboration is going to be similar to the challenge that we talked about before. You're either going to do it in Blackboard via the discussion boards. Another alternative is the assignments. So you'll have students submit into the assignments section a final product that would be graded or evaluated by the instructor based on whatever criteria that you have. One suggestion Mr. Hagan brought up that I think was very value added is that we can also use the journal entries in the Blackboard, so that way you can really grade individual effort in a group project. Instead of just jumping straight from the very beginning of a project to the end without really knowing who did what, journal entries will give you a clue as to who was working on what things during the time frame that it was available to them. So imagine for our group project, Mr. Ramirez for mid-year review or closeout. Perhaps at the very beginning of you giving them that data, you'll see that there's very few journal entries on a daily basis. But at the right at the very end, you'll see that there's a journal entry where it's very evident that there were certain people that were taking more of a leadership role than others. And the questions or the comments that they put in their journal make it very evident that they understood what was going on or they didn't understand what was going on. So there's several different ways to grade those kinds of projects. Honestly, those individual and group projects are going to be limited in the distant learning environment because that's To be honest with you, that's what we want to retain the most of here in the in-resident course. We want as little group projects out there in the distant learning portion, prerequisite, and we want as much of that in-house so that we can get interaction between the instructor and the student on a one-on-one basis. So in summary, those were all of the lessons for the entire BFMOC curriculum. The challenge for us from here on out is working with the development team in getting things the way that you want them in the appropriate environment. But what this does give us is sort of a pattern that we can use. So my suggestion is that when we look at our course chart, when we look at the information that's going to be presented in the new course, we kind of categorize, first of all, is this a case study? Is this a lecture? Is this a process? We categorize it one of those 7 things as a first step. Then the second step would be we ask ourselves, okay, of the options available via DCO, via Blackboard, what's going to be the best way for the students to accomplish this task? And then the last thing that we do is we ask ourselves, how are we going to evaluate it utilizing that system? I honestly think that the effort that we put into it now will pay dividends in the long run, because then we're not trying to make it up on the fly with students in a distant learning environment, but rather we'll have something already set out there. The flexibility that I hope that you see out of all this is that we have several options. So none of these is so concrete that you have to use any one learning management system or evaluation system, but rather we have many different options available to accommodate the instructors as well as the students in training development. There are lots and lots of issues that have yet to be answered. For example, as Mr. McGinley was saying, the dot mil issue, the CAC card issue, the student time zone issue. Fortunately, we're getting a little headway as far as resources. ATC has found a way to pay for Blackboard going into the next year. So whether, what's that? Blackboard is going to be like a software license that we get. All the classrooms now, anybody can dial into it, but what we're limited on is how many students can get into something at the same time. So right now all the permissions are going through Air University, so they use all of the permissions for professional military education, squadron officer college, all of the other stuff. What you're looking at, the Blackboard there, is a sandbox off of their permission set. So they're just lending it to us so that we can see what it's capable of doing, but we don't have our own license yet. So we don't actually have something that we can send out to the students and say, log in here and begin to take the course. That doesn't exist yet. Let's see. In answer to Ms. Johnson's or Dr. Johnson's question, yes, there are peer reviews as well as rubrics for grading and assessments that we have templates for, but no, we have not gone through the entire BFMOC course and decided exactly what rubric we'll use for each and every project that's out there. I guess the only thing that we do have is kind of like our Form 98, and we can use that as the basis for future rubric development. But no, we haven't gone that far. Q?
Hey, Captain Wright, this is Mr. Q.
Go right ahead.
Hey, I got a question. If you had to give an estimate of how much you've completed when you look at the entire course, how much would you say that you've gotten done?
0.
0%?
Right. We haven't even started.
Okay, but what you're building here in the sandbox, are you building anything, or are you just going through options?
Learning and going through options. In fact, this sandbox that was built was Major Howard's doing.
Right, right.
So all of these lessons that he built out there for us, he just threw that together to show us some examples, and we've given everybody access to them so that they can learn how to use these little options to rename things, to rearrange things, just to see the functionality of the Blackboard sandbox. But no, we have not gone through any of the development.
So have you, but you've been able to at least partition out how you would envision the course going?
What we have done is decided of these 7 types of lessons, these are the best ways to present those in a distant learning environment. There's a lot of things we haven't done. We haven't decided what order we're going to teach all these things. We haven't decided how we're going to evaluate them. There's quite a few steps to go.
Right.